we're letting our attendees in, we will also begin live streaming this on the UNDP Facebook.
We read introductions and then.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us in the launch of the joint program on INFF. Before we formally begin, we wish to inform our audience of the following house rules for the smooth conduct of this online activity. We wish to request everyone to kindly mute your microphone if you are not speaking to avoid unwanted noise and feedback. All questions and comments shall be directed to the Q&A box for those in the meeting room and to the comment section for those streaming via Facebook Live. Please make sure to state your name and organization before your question or comment. Thank you very much, and we look forward to everyone's cooperation. To formally open this program, we would like to introduce you to our event host. She is the co-founder and former Executive Director for 12 years of the Philippine Center for Apologies for that technical difficulty. Again, to formally open this program, we would like to introduce you to our event host. She is the co-founder and former Executive Director for 12 years of the Philippine Center for Investigative Journalism. She is also the co-convener of Right to Know Right Now Coalition. She has worked for various media agencies based in Manila and overseas. She has done journalism for print, radio, and television. She was the first editor-in-chief of GMAnews.tv online while working as the vice president for research and content development of GMA News and Public Affairs. Currently, she is the host of the Mangahas interviews at GMA News Online. Let us all welcome Ms. Malu Mangahas.
Magandang araw po sa inyong lahat. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the launch of the SDG JP program, joint program on reaping the democratic dividend and managing the socio-economic impact of COVID-19 by applying an integrated financing framework in the Philippines. In short, JPINFF. Remember the acronym. Thank you for being with us today. I am Malu Mangahas of the PCIJ and the Right to Know Right Now Coalition, and I will be your host this afternoon before we officially begin the event. Let me remind the audience, as you had been told, mute your microphones and turn off your video buttons to avoid disruption. All right, for most of the 18 months that had passed, the COVID-19 pandemic has been unsparing, disrupting economies and laying bare the fragility of public health, food systems, and supply chains. The joint program that we are launching this afternoon comes at an opportune time as the impact of the pandemic continues to bear down on all of us. The threat of COVID-19 is not the sole reason for the timeliness of the JPINFF. We also have upon us an immense opportunity to reap our democratic dividend, the economic growth potential that can result from shifts in population age structure, mainly when the share of the working age group population is larger than the now working age group. The launch of the JPINFF is a welcome development in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic, demographic opportunity, and the financing gaps in sustainable development. The JP is designed further to strengthen the current mechanisms of the national planning and budgeting processes and establish a more diversified and coherent framework for the government of the Philippines to strengthen in financing solutions to better support what it calls the We Recover as One or Bayanihan Law roadmap for COVID-19 and to bridge the financing gaps that slowed down the achievement of the SDGs in the country. We have two gentlemen today who will help us discuss the nuts and bolts of the issue. They're partners in crafting the JPINFF. First off, let's welcome Secretary Karl Kendrick Chua, Director General of the National Economic and Development Authority, or NEDA. Mr. Karl has really been a man of many parts. Before NEDA, he was Undersecretary for Strategy, Economics, and Results Group of the Department of Finance. In this work, he helped the government implement its 10-point socio-economic agenda by ensuring equitable and sustainable financing through the Comprehensive Tax Reform Program. Before DOF, he was the chief or senior country economist for the Philippines of the World Bank, where he advised the government on strategies and policies to attain more inclusive growth, the type that creates more and better jobs and reduces poverty. His partner in this project, not partner in crime, Mr. Gustavo Gonzalez. Senor Gustavo is the resident coordinator and humanitarian coordinator of the United Nations in the Philippines. He brings more than 25 years of extensive managerial and leadership experience in development, humanitarian affairs, and peace building, performing for several UN entities across Central America, Africa, and the Middle East. More recently, Senor Gustavo has worked for the Food and Agriculture Organization as Director of the Business Development and Resource Mobilization Division. Prior to that, he was the UNDP Sub-Regional Development Coordinator for the Syria-related crisis, covering operations in Egypt, Iraq, and Lebanon. He had also served in Jordan and Turkey. Before that, he was senior country director of UNDP in Yemen during the Arab Spring transition, country director in Burundi, and head of the post-conflict unit in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Welcome, gentlemen. Brief hello remarks. Secretary Karl and then Mr. Gustavo.
Good afternoon, Malu, and everyone to this forum.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Secretary Chua and Malu. Thank you so much for this introduction, and I'm quite happy to be part of this exercise. Thank you.
All right. So you will see a meeting of minds there, actually, and now we'd like them to lead us through the discussion of the JPINFF before we sign it all, no? Mr. Gustavo, from a global perspective, how has the COVID pandemic affected the trajectory, the work, build up or build down of the SDGs attainment? Can it still be achieved? And what should we do to actually accelerate achievement of the SDGs?
Thank you, Malu. We certainly need a workshop to answer this question. But I think that what all of us will recognize is that with different intensity and magnitude, all countries, they have been affected by the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. And of course, it affected their own plans for the sustainable development goals. So we must admit at this stage that in some way we are moving farther away from our development goals. Mm-hmm. And let me just share with you, you know that very regularly UNDP is releasing the Human Development Report.
Okay.
And what we are learning, for example, from the last version is that global human development, which is a combination of, indicators from the health, education, and living standards. So what we know is that human development could fall this year for the first time since 1990. That was the year when we started measuring human development.
Mhm.
And I think that what is the disappointing in facing this, the impact of the pandemic, disappointing for all of us and of course for the UN, is that we were doing great progress in some of the SDGs in areas like, for example, poverty reduction, maternal and child health, perhaps not enough to define a sustained trend to the Agenda 2030, but enough to demonstrate that if we have political will, if we join efforts, so progress is possible. So the challenges are certainly enormous. No, for example, if you refer to the SDG 1, SDG 1 is ending poverty is a sort of the bedrock of the 2030 agenda. So last year, as a result of the COVID-19, the global extreme poverty rate went up for the first time in over 20 years. So we have today 124 million of people, they pushed back into extreme poverty. And SDG 2, that we made quite important progress in the past before COVID-19. SDG 2 is ending hunger. No, from the beginning, we work on the idea of being the generation that will end hunger. The news are not encouraging, so we have an additional between 70 and 100 million of people experiencing hunger in 2020 due to the pandemic. No, and we can even add the paradox, of fighting hunger is that 1/3 of the food that we produce is waste and loss. No, so and something that is related to the Philippines, for which we are working very close with the government, is SDG 4. No, SDG 4 is quality of education. No, we realize that lockdowns, closing of schools has compromised hard-won development gains, 20 years of investment. So, and again, we are working with the government to address this that is directly affecting, the quality of education, and of course, is affecting children. And in this context, the fact of the narrowing of the fiscal space, so the fact of fiscal resources plunging, debt is skyrocketing. So the question is, so how we can go back to the track, globally and in the Philippines, and I believe that the response could sound a little bit a political response, but this is that we must go back. We must go back. So this is an imperative, and we can still be the generation ending poverty and ending hunger. So if there is something that we learned from this crisis is the way that our problems are extremely interconnected. And that the solutions needs to come by our capacity to pool resources, build alliances, coalitions. And if I refer to my own experience working for the UN, this is something that, let's say, is one of the, if we can say it in inverted commas, one of the positive side of the impact of COVID-19 is this needs to join efforts, to build coalitions and partnerships. It's the first time that I see this strong investment, in putting together knowledge and resources. Yeah. So we from the UN, Malu, I think that we are not operating in a vacuum. So we have the knowledge, we have the science, we have the technology, we have the resources if they are allocated in a strategic manner. This is one of the objectives of this project.
Right.
We need the political will, no? This unity of purpose, no? Effective leadership. And sometimes, political will requires a vision, and we have the vision. It's the Agenda 2030. So we are working on such a direction.
Mr. Gustavo, what resources and tools are available in the Philippines? And would you say there are plans for the UN to have some financing strategies that could support at country level?
What we realized is let's say, at this stage of the response to the crisis, and at this stage where we need to keep on track with the SDGs. So on one side, we need good policies. We need policies. On another side, we need to mobilize huge level of financing to put these policies at the required scale. And this is the main objective of this project. No, this project has let's say the sense of this project is precisely to get a bridge between policies that now the idea is to ensure that are embedded in the SDGs, and resources that I think that there is a global recognition that when we talk about resources, we're talking, let's say, not just the domestic one, not just the ODA, not just foreign direct investment, but a wide range of resources that should be part of this big picture. This is the advantage of this project. It's like creating a big picture where we will try to match the different sources of funding to make sure that we are supporting policies that help in the recovery and to put us on the SDG agenda.
Okay, very good. All hands on deck and all money on the table, no? But we would now like to ask Secretary Karl, can you give us a general picture of the status of achieving the SDGs by the Duterte administration? And what are your hopes? What is the balance of work still? Secretary Karl?
Thank you, Malu, for the question. Let me divide the answer into two periods. I'll call them BC and AD. BC is before COVID. AD is after Delta. Just to give you an idea of how I think, to simplify matter. Before COVID, that was early 2020, we achieved many of the SDG targets. The Philippines saw the lowest ever poverty rate. We lifted 6 million Filipinos out of poverty, 4 years ahead of our target of 2022. We saw the lowest level unemployment and underemployment rates. And we were about to become an upper middle income country in 2020, if not for COVID. And the reason for this is we have incorporated the SDGs in our development planning. We also started with the President's 0 to 10 point socio-economic agenda, where prior to COVID, we achieved around 85%. We did manage the economy well. We did the tax reform that's funding all the infrastructure. We did the national ID. We did the rice tariffication law. We enacted the Universal Healthcare, the Space Agency Act, the Innovation Act. We saw the ease of doing business improving. So all of these show significant progress before COVID or BC. Now let's talk about AD, after Delta. Delta, or the Delta variant of the virus, is not going to go away easily. We have to live with this virus for maybe several years. People are now saying that this virus from pandemic is going to become endemic. We have to get our vaccination this year and probably booster shots every year, like as if it were a flu vaccine. So we have to live with this virus. And what this entails is to adjust to this new normal. In this new normal, we will be seeing some changes, but it doesn't mean that they are insurmountable. So to summarize, we have seen some of these indicators where we have significant gains delayed for a couple of years or 3 years. The pandemic has affected the Philippines very much, as with the rest of the world, but we have the foundations, the economic, social foundations to recover. this poverty and higher unemployment in the past year and this year is not the result of the vanishing of our resources. We still have the people, their skills. We have our infrastructure, the factories and the offices. The problem is the pandemic made it impossible for everyone to work because we had to be more risk averse initially. So what we saw is a significant decline in productivity. But moving forward, we are working on three important pillars to recover and get us back on track to achieving our SDGs. Number one is vaccination.
Okay.
We are vaccinating some 500,000 per day at the peak. And pending the incoming supply, we have guaranteed the 70 million individuals will be getting their initial 2 shots. And we are expanding that soon to children. So that is the first, to get the economy back, to create more and better jobs and bring poverty rates down. Number 2 is to better manage the risk. Last year and early this year, we closed a big part of the economy to protect lives from COVID, but the lives from non-COVID diseases like cancer, diabetes, and even hunger have sadly increased. So we are balancing our concern of both COVID and non-COVID by managing the risk and closing down only the sectors or parts of the country where there is the highest risk, so that we can allow the majority of the people who can take care of themselves, they know how to wash hands and wear a mask, to get a decent life. And number 3 is we are fast-tracking the implementation of our recovery program. We have a very big package, combination of lower taxes, subsidies, fiscal support, financial and monetary support, and we intend to enhance the implementation. So that is where we are. I am still hopeful that after a few years of delay, we will be able to get back on track because of the strong social and economic foundations and our commitment to the SDGs. Thank you.
Secretary Karl, how would the joint program on INFF be important in boosting our efforts in the Philippines to achieve the SDGs?
Okay, thank you for the question, Malu. Let me start by sharing with all of you 2 economic principles that I always mention in my speeches to give you an idea of the challenge in terms of financing. The first principle, nothing is free from heaven. And the second principle, everything is a trade-off. Now, all of us care for our country. We care for our people, our planet Earth. And there is really a need for everyone's concern to be more organized. And there is a need also to determine who can best deliver the results that we want. Everyone wants to help, but if you put all the cooks in the kitchen, then the outcome may not be sufficient, or it can even mess up the soup. So this document, this strategy, is a very important way to prioritize, to determine who is in the best position to support our needs, who can do it better and faster, and how should we target the support so that the people actually feel it. So that is my first point. But the second point is, beyond this strategy document, this financing framework, is really how the government actually gets things done. In the government, there is a NEDA board. One of the committee is the Development Budget Coordination Committee. And there is a subcommittee that we created on the SDGs. And that is how we intend to prioritize, program properly, even tagging all the expenditures in the budget along each of the SDG indicators, so that we know more accurately what is the progress, and to take decisive and quick action if there is some slowdown. This is not only NEDA or the DBCC, the rest of the government are involved. The Philippine Statistics Authority has to produce the data, and all the government agencies in charge of their respective sectors like education or health also have to be involved. So this is what this document or strategy is. Beyond that is really everyone, including non-government players, civil society and development partners to fully participate. Thank you.
All right. Very good, Mr. Gonzalez and Secretary Chua. I think we had a good start for these sessions, you know. So we've known that yes, poverty, hunger, incidents are all up. Education is, our schools are in distress. But the Secretary Karl said, you know, there are fixed targets, clear indicators, and they would like to build on the ability of communities, the social talents or social investments, as well as getting people all hands on deck on this project. Match the financing with the burdens of development and achieving the SDGs. We now move on to the signing of the JP document and commitment of support. We will proceed to the formal launch with our other representatives from the UN family. The joint program document encapsulates the strategic framework, description, and implementation and governance arrangements that will be signed by our following guests. The United Nations in the Philippines, represented by Resident Coordinator and Humanitarian Coordinator, Mr. Gustavo Gonzalez. The National Economic and Development Authority, represented by Secretary Karl Kendrick Chua. The United Nations Development Program, through Resident Representative Mr. Selva Ramachandran. The United Nations Population Fund, represented by Country Representative Dr. Laila Judain. The United Nations Children's Fund, represented by Ms. Oyun Dendevnorov. May I call on our esteemed signatories to affix their autographs, their signature, on the program document. So this is now a blood compact, actually a signing event, so that we will commit with clarity and purpose our organizations to this document. Everybody will sign, and then we will ask people to show proof of what they've signed. All right, can we raise our document up a little? Just like this. To your right, a little to your right, and then without actually covering your faces. Everybody will sign. Okay. Now, we would also like to request a lot of the other stakeholders and development partners to sign their statement of support. But before that, I'd like to call on Ms. Louie Lim Holongbayan of the UNDP to read the statement of support. Ms. Louie?
Thank you, Ms. Malu. Thank you for the opportunity. I read the statement of support to the joint program on reaping the demographic dividend and managing the socio-economic impact of COVID-19 by applying an integrated national financing framework in the Philippines. This reads, we, partners and stakeholders from national and local government, civil society, and multilateral organizations welcome the implementation of the Joint SDG Fund Joint Program on INFF that aims to support the government of the Philippines in strengthening the enabling framework and integrated financing solutions to better support the We Recover as One roadmap for COVID-19 and to bridge the financing gaps to support the acceleration of progress of achievement of the SDGs in the country, starting with SDGs related to reaping the demographic dividend. We support the application of the building blocks of the integrated national financing framework to strengthen government's national planning and budgeting mechanisms to ensure that an integrated approach is taken for more effective resource allocation to meet the country's development objectives. We acknowledge the importance of harnessing the country's demographic dividend to advance its development and consider strategies for enhancing inclusive growth and promoting employment to achieve far greater prosperity, equity, and sustainability. We acknowledge that realizing the goals and aspirations of the joint program can only be addressed through reinvigorated partnerships and collaboration. We therefore underscore the need to continue enhanced collective efforts and promote synergy among various stakeholders around ambitious policies that advance key issues on SDG financing. We, the joint program partners and stakeholders, further reaffirm our commitment to making the implementation of the joint program a priority. We support the call to action to deliver a holistic approach that leverages the value added of all stakeholders and resources
for greater sustainable development impact. With less than 9 years left to 2030, we are committed to make the coming decade one of action and delivery in the spirit of leaving no one behind.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Louie. I'd like to call on the people who will be signing off to this document. They are our partners and stakeholders. Finance Undersecretary Gil Beltran, Population Commission Undersecretary Juan Antonio Perez, GP Perez, World Bank Country Director Indiam Diop, from the Philippine Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Joel Ryan Tugade, Chairperson of the PCCI Committee on the SDGs, the Global Compact Network in the Philippines, led by Yayu Javier, and Social Watch Philippines co-convener Jessica Cantos. Can we now sign the document and then show it up once you've signed it? To your right, ladies and gentlemen, the document. All right, we have quick signatories there. Everybody has signed it. All right. I think for getting your picture on board, the UN, they will remember this, and the NEDA also. So don't take it for granted that you've signed something that you will not have to commit to implement. All right. This is the end of the first part of our program. We will have to actually move on to a bigger panel discussion. To better understand the joint program, the team prepared a brief overview of the program. Let's listen to this, and then we'll go to our moderated session, Perspectives on Making the Philippine Planning and Budgeting Systems More Supportive of the SDGs. Are we ready with the...
Thank you, Ms. Malu. This is Louie again from UNDP. Good afternoon, magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat. I am pleased to share with you an introductory briefing on the joint SDG Fund joint program on INFF. I won't use the long title anymore in the interest of time. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development calls for a paradigm shift to put the world on a path of sustainable development. The 17 goals respect planetary boundaries and ensure that all people can enjoy the benefits of sustained progress while living in peaceful, just, and inclusive societies. To ensure that the implementation of the 2030 Agenda leaves no one behind, the global community has taken concerted efforts to meet its financing needs. It has been estimated that at current levels of investment in SDG relevant sectors, developing countries face an annual gap of $2.5 trillion. Although an ambitious task, bridging such a financing gap is possible. That statement was made in 2018 when the joint SDG Fund was launched. That statement was made before the COVID-19 pandemic enveloped our daily lives. According to the UN Sustainable Development Goals report for 2021, released just last July, while some gains have been evident, the world was already off track to achieve the SDGs by the 2030 deadline, even before COVID-19 pandemic. Financing has already been identified as one of the key challenges to achieving the SDGs, and many countries in Asia and the Pacific identified financing gaps as the major obstacle they are confronted with. The COVID-19 pandemic has confronted governments with significant spending needs for the immediate crisis response and investments for recovery, and a parallel and major drop in access to a wide range of financing sources. These provide a stark reminder that sustainable development plans and associated financing strategies must be risk-informed and long-term oriented. Next slide. Within the broader context of the 2030 Agenda, the UN Development System came together to develop a major new initiative that will support governments to advance the SDGs. This is the Joint Fund for the 2030 Agenda, or the Joint SDG Fund. The fund builds on the UN's ability to convene diverse stakeholders and help develop national capacity to work across policy domains in an integrated manner and to stimulate an enabling environment for SDG investments. The substantive focus of the joint SDG fund reflects areas in which the UN, as a smart investor, expects to achieve the greatest impact by allocating its resources wisely and serve as a catalyst to influence much larger financing flows. It is a country-focused instrument supporting priority interagency efforts towards joined-up implementation on the ground. It focuses on the integration of UN agencies at the country, regional, and global level, a next generation of partnerships among UN country teams with governments, national stakeholders, the private sector, and other development partners. The joint SDG fund has three interlinked domains of functions to incentivize the transformative policy shifts and stimulate the strategic investments required to get the world back on track to meet the SDGs and recover from the impacts of COVID-19. These are integrated social protection, which is considered as an SDG accelerator, catalyzing strategic programming and investments, and the third one, reinforcing the SDG financing architecture and ecosystem. Under this, the joint SDG fund will support the development of SDG-aligned financing strategies, such as the Integrated National Financing Framework. This work features the strengthening of capacities at the national and subnational level and the nurturing of dialogues and solutions that feature roles for public sector institutions and the private and financial sector, among many other critical players. Next slide. In the Addis Ababa Action Agenda on Financing for Development, UN member states introduced the concept of integrated national financing frameworks to help better align their financing policies with long-term development strategies and plans. Integrated financing frameworks are a country-owned planning and delivery tool that provide a framework for financing sustainable development at the national level. They bring together a full range of financing sources: public finance and tax, aid, borrowing, private investments, all to align resource flows and policies to support national development strategies or plans, and lay out a strategy to increase investment, manage risks, and achieve sustainable development. The joint SDG fund calls for the establishment of the building blocks of INFFs in more than 70 countries, including in the Philippines, which is what we are launching today. Next slide. Countries, including the Philippines, are not starting from scratch. INFFs are already embedded within, and they have strengthened existing institutions and processes, which takes into consideration country circumstances and needs. Each building block represents a critical component to strategically plan and manage the financing of sustainable development actions. Designing and implementing activities within each of these building blocks is an iterative process, with progress in each building block reinforcing the development of the others. The common elements or the building blocks of the INFF include assessment and diagnostic, which include estimating financing needs, analytical work on financing trends, and understanding the risk landscape and assessing resilience, among others. The second building block is a financing strategy, which helps find solutions to close financing gaps, overcome constraints, and make the most of financing opportunities. The third block, monitoring and review, supports the tracking of financing trends, assessing progress in the implementation of financing strategy, and feeding lessons from policy implementation back to policy design. The last block, governance and coordination mechanism, includes establishing and maintaining political backing and leadership, ensuring country ownership, facilitating participation of all relevant stakeholders, among many others. Next slide. Against this backdrop, UNDP, UNFPA, and UNICEF came together to develop the joint program under the Joint SDG Fund. The joint program is designed to apply the building blocks of the INFF to provide catalytic support to government. These are tools, technical assistance for strengthening systems, support in coordination and consensus building on priorities as part of a whole of government and multi-stakeholder approach to strengthen not only the current mechanisms of national planning, financing, and budgeting processes to ensure that resource allocation is more effectively targeted using a strengthened monitoring and evaluation system, but also to put in place a more diversified and coherent financing framework that can together help to leverage additional resources to better support the achievement of SDGs, COVID-19 recovery, and the PDP outcomes in an integrated manner. This includes harnessing the opportunity brought about by having a population with relatively younger, working age members who are able to access human development opportunities. For the Philippines to continue making significant gains towards these, the joint program aims to achieve the three sub-outcomes of developing and adopting an integrated national financing framework that supports SDGs achievement and the national development outcomes, applying the INFF for complex priority issues within a risk mitigation framework for COVID-19, and through analytical work, identify strategies for alternative funding sources for the SDGs. Next slide. The joint program outputs are shown here as mapped against the INFF building blocks. Among others, the joint program will strengthen the capacity of government to develop and monitor risk-informed multi-sectoral costed action plans on demographic dividend at the national and local levels, support evidence-based policymaking, planning, financing, and scale-up of high-impact essential child and adolescent services at the national and local levels as well, improve budget allocation for and expenditures for programs, services, and results for children at LGU level, and to strengthen the capacity of local government units and the national government on budget analysis and expenditure. This is also where the budget tagging exercise that Secretary Karl Chua is lodged under monitoring and review. Next slide. In line with the implementation of the UN Development System Reform Agenda, the Joint SDG Fund Joint Program demonstrates a new generation of collaboration for results and commits to enhance national ownership, leadership, and capacities. That is why, as part of the governance mechanism of the joint program, we have identified at the highest levels within the UN and government through NEDA, the co-chairs of the joint program steering committee. A technical working group will also be organized, which shall provide technical guidance and inputs to planning, implementation, monitoring, reporting, and evaluation in line with the directions set by the Joint Program Steering Committee and consistent with the Joint SDG Fund Secretariat requirements. A core group within the UN will also provide governance and oversight of the system-wide country financing, of the support to the system-wide country financing instruments, and provide the overall coordination and quality assurance of the joint program. In the interest of time, I will skip the succeeding slide, which presents the roles and responsibilities of the Joint Program Steering Committee, as well as the technical working group. Next slide. And the next slide, please. And this is the last one. The joint program has less than 2 years to deliver on its commitments and effectively contribute to the outcomes identified. Nonetheless, we keep in mind key lessons from early implementers of the INFF in other countries, that we need to ensure national ownership and sustainability, building support from the highest level of government, complemented by leadership at the senior technical level. And that is why we have the steering committee and the technical working group. Ensure that we engage legislature, the private sector, civil society, development partners, and other relevant stakeholders to create broad-based buy-in. And to ensure effective implementation, we will ensure that national government is in the lead throughout the process. We take a gradual, targeted, and adaptive approach to prioritize actions and will remain responsive to changing circumstances. Lastly, we will build, where possible, on existing coordination, dialogue, and reform processes.
All right.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to present a brief on the joint program, Malu. Back to
All
you.
right. Thank you, Ms. Louie. That was a very intricate plan, but with a lot of specifics on how to do it, who will be in charge, highest level of commitment, but also lowest level to the LGU of implementation and the broadest network of coalition partners who will implement it. Now I turn you over to Dr. Rosario Manasan, who will be the moderator for our panel discussion. Let's delve into specifics. Let's get various voices in. And also, let's see how we could improve on the goals already laid out earlier in the day. Let me introduce Dr. Chat Manasan, as if she needs any further introduction. Dr. Manasan is a retired senior research fellow at the Philippine Institute for Development Studies, where she spearheaded research programs on policy finance and fiscal policy, public finance and fiscal policy. She has published extensively, and we have learned a lot of it, of our insights on, in journalism from PIDS productions. She has done articles on taxation, public expenditure analysis, fiscal decentralization, social protection, and other social sector issues. In May 2020, she authored a United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific working paper, Government Budget and the Sustainable Development Goals, the Philippine Experience, which assessed how fiscal Philippine policies support the realization of the SDGs. Before I finally turn the floor to her, let me just give a shout out to our participants from the diplomatic missions from all over, I think, places in the Philippines, stakeholders, CSOs, and development partners. Dr. Chat, it's come on board. Your panel is up.
Thank you very much, Malu. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. For this part of this afternoon session, we are joined by our panel of experts to talk about perspectives towards making the Philippine planning and budgeting systems more supportive of the SDGs. First, we have with us DOF Undersecretary Gil S. Beltran. Undersecretary Gil Beltran has served as Undersecretary of the DOF since 2005 and was appointed its Chief Economist in 2013. Yusek Beltran has lent his expertise in a variety of areas, including fiscal policy, human resource and operations management, economic policy and research, and financial inclusion policies and strategies. We also have in the panel POPCOM Executive Director Juan Antonio Perez III, or JP. Undersecretary JP is currently the Executive Director of the Commission on Population and Development. He has over 27 years of experience in public and private sector health programs in the Philippines. Before joining POPCOM as Executive Director 5 years ago, he managed programs for the Department of Health of the Philippines. He has also worked with the USAID, the World Bank, and the Asian Development Bank. We also have with us World Bank Country Director Jem Diop. Mr. Diop has over 20 years of World Bank experience working with East Asia and the Middle East and North Africa, South Asia, and Sub-Saharan Africa. Prior to his current role, he has 4 years he was for 4 years practice manager for macroeconomics, trade, and investment for East Asia, providing technical and strategic guidance to the economic team working in Southeast Asia and the Pacific region. Finally, we are joined by Mr. Selva Ramachandran, UNDP resident representative, a seasoned development practitioner. Dr. Ramachandran served as the UNDP resident representative and country director of UNDP Sudan from July 2015 to September 2020, prior to his appointment as Philippine resident representative. He also served as the UNDP country director in Libya, as chief of North East Asia and Mekong Division, Regional Bureau of Asia and the Pacific, New York. He was also the UNDP country director in Yemen, and he was the chief of the regional program and deputy chief of Southeast Asia and Pacific region, Regional Bureau for Asia Pacific, New York, and the UNDP resident representative in Kazakhstan. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome our panelists. You can.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Okay. Before I proceed, let me just, with the roundtable, let me just provide a little bit of context in the discussion. I think Secretary Karl Chua has articulated the situation very vividly. Before COVID, after Delta. Malu has mentioned that I wrote a paper on budgeting, planning, and the SDGs in the Philippines. And in that paper, I was just talking with our panelists earlier. I was very optimistic. I said, oh, the Philippines is in a good place. It is well placed in terms of capacity to support the achievement of the SDGs. All the SDGs are mapped into the priorities of the Philippine Development Plan, and the indicators of the SDGs are almost, not quite, but almost congruent with the indicators in the PDP. Also, the budgeting process in the Philippines has a fairly strong emphasis on results and performance, and therefore provides the foundation for linking the annual budget with the PDP and the SDGs. Then there is tax reform, the macroeconomic fundamentals are good. However, when the pandemic came, the trajectory of the Philippines' achievement of the SDG was derailed, or in fact, reversed. And because of it also revealed gaps in the country's healthcare capacity and social protection system, it has had devastating impact on the economy, which experienced its worst recession since 1946. Unemployment rose, schools has no face-to-face classes, and that resulted in learning losses. And so we have a lot of things to catch up on. In fact, we have to get back on track, and to do that would require more resources, more so than we thought we needed before. And so for our panel discussion this afternoon, I think what we want to hear from our experts here and the panelists is their views on what should we do, what does the government need to do, as well as the stakeholders, on how to improve the country's planning and budgeting systems and its resource mobilization and financing strategies to facilitate the country's post-pandemic recovery and the achievement of the SDGs. So at this point, I would like to ask a general question, and this is addressed to all members of the panel. The question being, what changes are needed what improvements do we need to put in place in the government's planning and budgeting system, as well as financing systems and strategies, in order to fast track the recovery from COVID-19 and to put the economy back on track towards achieving the SDGs? Let me start with Yusek here.
Yeah, good afternoon, Dr. Manasan. Yeah, actually, we are in the middle of a comprehensive tax reform program. The first two phases of the program have been approved by Congress. These are the adjustments in excise tax rates and the lowering of individual income taxes. That's the first phase. The second phase is create, which is rationalizing fiscal incentives and the lowering of corporate income taxes. There are still two phases of the comprehensive tax reform program that are now in the Senate, and we expect that these measures would be approved this year to allow us to attain the 3% of GDP additional revenues that are expected from the program. Also, we expect that soon we will also implement the e-invoicing system, which will allow us to reduce the leakages from the tax system as a result of some of under declaration of incomes and transactions. We are sure that given the experience of Korea in this area, which we are tapping right now, we will be able to increase, attain the 3% of GDP revenues that we expect to attain. Also, we want to make sure that the private sector will contribute to resource mobilization. And after the Mandanas ruling, which reduced national government resources, because we have to increase the share of local governments in national government revenues, we have to look at PPPs more intensively to find out where we can use the private sector revenues, private sector resources to continue the build program, which has been ongoing since the start of the third administration. As a matter of fact, for the past 3 years, public investments to GDP have risen to 5 to 6% of GDP, which is much higher than what we had before the crisis. Before the crisis, we only had about 2 to 3% of GDP as public investments in infrastructure. Other things, we have the two laws already passed by Congress. The feast law, which will allow government to help address the credit requirements, to help the private sector unload their non-performing loans to the private sector so that it can be moved to other hands which can make these NPLs productive. Also, we have we have increased the capitalization of government financial institutions. We raised them by about $1 billion, which will help, which will push for more credit to sectors severely affected by the crisis. We expect that assuming a leverage ratio about 10 to 1, then the GFIs can produce about that's about 10 billion in new credits to sectors that are badly affected by the crisis. We we are thankful to Congress that they approved the CREATE bill, which lowered the corporate income tax rate for all enterprises, and this will help them recover from the crisis. This will give them about 100 billion of support to viable enterprises that have been hit by the crisis. I think these are some of the things that we are already doing. Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Yusek Hill. I would like to go back later, but in the meantime, I'd like to listen first to other panelists. But let me get back to you on the other proposed tax measures later on. At this point, I'd like, I would be happy, or I would like to ask Yusek GP to talk to us and tell us, you know, what needs to be done so we can accelerate the recovery and get the Philippines back on track towards achieving the SDGs.
Yes, thank you, Doc Chat. First of all, let me go back a bit to the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals, for which ended around 2015. And I was with DOH already with the commission at that time. And I was talking to one mayor in Samar who later became DILD chief. And is now a congressman, actually. And he told me that the LGUs were latecomers when it came to MDGs. They did not know that they could have helped the country on MDGs because I think it was seen by local governments as a national effort to achieve the Millennium Development Goals. And he said when he started to work on MDGs, they were about to end. But fortunately, we now have the SDGs. With the SDGs, I think his realization should be something that we should take to heart, that when it comes to getting things done, with localities, with communities, if you talk about Millennium Development Goals and maternal mortality and the health goals, poverty reduction, LGUs are at the center of that effort, and they can be a major contribution. And he was very much pushing the agenda that LGUs should be more involved when the SDGs come along. And fortunately, we now have the Mandanas ruling, which in a way shift local development impetus, you might say, from national government, which tried to push really the MDGs, now to local governments that with added resources in a perfect world could make the difference and achieve sustainable development goals. And it's important that mechanisms such as this INFF can link social development goals at the local level to their budgeting process, to the fact that they are now going to be recipients of 200+ billion pesos in 2022, which could go to these efforts at local level. And it's important that in the next year, we really get on board with local governments so that it can be a smoother process, linking national efforts to achieve SDGs now to LGUs, putting it to the cart of the LGUs who will now be leading that effort. And it really needs more harmonization of national and local efforts in all areas of SDG, poverty reduction, health, economic, and environment. But of course, we also have to deal with COVID, as Secretary Karl said. We had BC, and when COVID came along, we in the Commission and other government agencies were really very worried of the impact it would have on our programs and our projects. And we made a quick study that the impact of COVID to the Philippine population, particularly, would be a reduction in the health programs, particularly family planning and all, and then a consequent increase in number of births among teens and older and other women. But we have seen, contrary to that, that during the first year of COVID last year, family planning programs improved. We had more users of contraceptives, and I think partly this was driven by the fact that women do not want to be in a pregnant state during COVID. They want to avoid all the problems that would make. But and of course that has led to the past 10 years we have been working on improving reproductive health in this country, and that really in a way is making it possible for that to continue. But if you look at the other side, if you look at a demographic dividend and for this country, and MEDA through the Philippine Development Plan has actually put it front and center in Chapter 13, that this country will achieve a demographic dividend within the next decade, no? From the time it was started. And the picture there is a bit more difficult because right now our let's say picture, when we look at dependency ratios or support ratios, we are about at the national level, we're at around 0.4 support ratio. We want a 0.5 support ratio, which would mean one worker supporting two individuals. Nationwide, we're at that picture. If you break it down by region, we know that the dividend is possible and might already be there for some regions like Region 3, Central Luzon, NCR, and Calabarzon. They are already below, particularly NCR, their fertility rate, which is one of the precursors of a demographic dividend, is already below 2. It's 1.9. But the rest of the country outside of these three regions, you will see a situation that is not very good for regions like the Bicol region, Region 5, which has a support ratio of around almost 3. And the same is in Eastern Samar. The same for Zamboanga. And worst of all, BARM has a support ratio of 3.87. That means the young people are not employed. The incomes are not adequate to bring the support ratio up. We are also having to deal with increasing teen pregnancy. So these are the impacts of, that might be worse and even. This is something we saw 2019, 2020. It might even be worse. DC, as Secretary Karl said, we have to look again and recalibrate after we have a period post-DC. Thank you, Doc Chat.
Thank you, USEC GP. I think you have raised two very important points. One is the importance of getting the LGUs to be more focused and to work with the national government, that the SDGs is not just a national government concern, but it's the concern of the entire country, not just government, but also the entire country. Not just the national, but the local as well, plus the private sector and other stakeholders. Then you have also raised, but that raises a whole lot of questions, and I would like to get back to that later. Then you have talked about the accelerating demographic transition to be able to realize the demographic dividend. But you also talked about the diversity or the variances in terms regional, variances in terms of where they are at in terms of demographic transition. And I think that raises questions on increasing inequality, knowing that the demographic transition really has impact on economic growth, employment, etc., etc. So I will get back to you on that later, GP. Let me ask Ms. Director Nijem Diop, how does the World Bank see its role in helping expand alternative sources of financing the SDGs, especially now that the gaps appear to be much bigger, given what has happened during COVID?
So thank you very, very much. First of all, let me thank the UN for the invitation. I think during this time of COVID, as governments around the world are confronted with the urgent needs to recover from the health and economic crisis, I think the sort of reminder that we also need to focus on the SDG and the longer term, which is ultimately about attending to the needs of the poor and the vulnerable group is very important. So I really commend the UN for demonstrating thought leadership and for convening this important discussion. Now, among the 17 SDGs, ending poverty is a goal number 1 for the World Bank. And as you know, it is also the twin goals of the World Bank Group, along with promoting shared prosperity. So the SDGs transpire throughout the entire World Bank Group work, and it provides greater focus on for our engagement with our countries and creates platforms for collaboration with government, civil society, private sector. And we have always we have forged with the UN a strong partnership in many countries to collectively make a positive contribution to development outcome while preserving the distinct mandate of every of our respective institution. Now, on your question, I think the world is confronted with 3 big challenges going forward. One is we need a catch-up plan to remedy the scars and the damages and the reversals created by COVID, as was mentioned earlier. Second, we need to be more creative in financing. And then third, there's a need to be even more effective in executing to get results from limited resources, including at the lowest level of government. Now, on the first point, the whole East Asia, if I just take East Asia region that I'm quite familiar with, the whole region is suffering a reversal of fortune. Secretary Karl has eloquently talked about the remarkable progress that the Philippines made before the COVID. Now, unfortunately, COVID is a very big hit to health, education, poverty, and other indicators. And while all households have suffered, the poorer were more likely to experience a loss of income, to sell their productive assets, or to suffer greater food insecurity. And they have more children not engaged in learning. So not only the poor were hardest hit by the pandemic, but they're also the least prepared to cope with the pandemic because they have limited access to digital resources and the quality of their jobs do not really support their resilience. Now, going forward, I think remedying the scars created by COVID will be critical to achieve the MDGs. And of course, this is affected by demographic dividends and jobs, as was mentioned earlier, I think, by Yusef Perez. Now, in the short to medium term, this challenge will be very daunting for the regions in the country where the support rate is low, such as the BAM. They will find it much more difficult to remedy the scars. And I think a more specific reflection is really warranted for the regions of the country that present those characteristics. I think the NCR, where the demographic dividend is more tangible and where the longer term impact on growth will be more positive, has perhaps less of a challenge in that front than some part of the country. Now, on your question about financing, which is my second point, let me make really here 3 points. First, the scars of the pandemic may actually reduce long-term growth. For example, some firms, some good firms in many countries are exiting the market because of the lockdowns, etc. And this is a loss of intangible assets. At the same time, some of the surviving firms may postpone their investment. So it is likely that we will be, between now and perhaps 2030, we will be in a low growth environment, and that affects revenue collection, of course. The second point I want to make is that the prolonged economic distress is straining the capacity of government around the world to provide economic support in their countries. And then thirdly, the external environment may pose further constraints to countries. For example, industrial countries, because of their advance in vaccination, they may recover faster than countries, for example, in this region. And if they tighten their monetary policy, that will impose perhaps, at least there's a risk of a premature monetary tightening in all countries around the world. And this is really a risk that we need to watch. But financing is not just a challenge for the public sector. For the private sector and for the banking sector, there is this issue of many firms having accumulated debt and many households having accumulated debt, and pushing the financing to these stakeholders might be quite challenging. So what we need, I think, is a financing catch-up for the SDG, and the challenge is global. So I think we need to think beyond country-level efforts and think about a global coalition, perhaps, to really fix this problem for all developing countries. Because different countries will face different degrees of constraints. Countries with good, credible fiscal track record and a good reputation in financial market, I think will not really face a huge challenge in terms of raising more funding. Their constraint will be more internal, perhaps the need to adopt fiscal consolidation to reduce the fiscal deficit and to put public financing in a stronger footing as the recovery gains traction. And I think the Philippines is in this category because it started the pandemic with very low debt to GDP ratio and has a very good track record in financial markets. So borrowing, I don't think will be a problem, but the government itself may have less appetite for increasing borrowing after 2 years of expanding expenditure to support the economy. Now, I think, and this was I think mentioned earlier, on financing, what we really need is to adopt a more comprehensive approach to financing, to catalyze resources, and to also do the extra reforms in domestic resource mobilization, including bringing the private sector. I think Yusef Bertrand mentioned that, and I think that's a very pertinent point. Gustavo also referred to this need for a comprehensive approach to financing, and I fully agree with that. When we integrate and coordinate our financing and program, we are more effective and we can support governments better. And a good example in the Philippines is ongoing joint collaboration. We have the World Bank, ADB, and AIIB, but also UN agencies to support vaccination on financing and deployment. So I feel like we are much more effective by working together and coordinating really our programs and actions than if we were going apart and supporting the government separately. We also have the ambition to do the same in the BAM. So we have launched with the UN a roadmap exercise that will help us improve our collaboration and coordination so that both at the financing and at the program level, we will be more effective in achieving the result we want to achieve. I do believe that the Philippines has the foundation to bounce back. I think in the short term, it will be critical to advance in vaccination. And that really could help, especially if it's combined with more granular lockdown, as was, I think, announced recently. Now, in the longer term, I believe demographic dividend will help growth in the Philippines. And the reason is very simple. 60% or plus of the GDP in this country is driven by NCR+. And in this area, the support rate is low. So we see in our projection, long-term projection at the World Bank, we see a country like the Philippines and Indonesia, for example, as growing, having a higher long-term potential growth than the rest of the region because precisely of that. And if you add to that, the urbanization rate in the Philippines, which is really almost poised to increase, and the emphasis on infrastructure, I think those are structural drivers that should help growth. But there is one condition. They should be accompanied by good policy. When you have favorable structural drivers such as demographic, urbanization, and infrastructure, and you have good public policy, you have high growth. And that's what we saw in the Philippines. Between 2010 and 2019, growth has averaged 6.3% of GDP. So to the extent that growth, the public policies will be implemented in the future, I feel quite optimistic that growth may still be among the sort of highest in the region. And then my final point is on implementation. And here I will not be long because I think Yusek Perez spoke very eloquently about the importance of linking national efforts with supporting LGUs to plan, allocate the budget, and execute soundly all the programs and activities in all SDGs areas. I fully agree with this, and I don't need to elaborate on this because I think that's really the key point. Getting the resources or the financing is just one part of the equation. In many countries, actually, including the Philippines, money does not always get you results. Because of coordination issues, capacity issues, implementation issues at the frontline level. So local level budget allocation across the SDG areas and priorities, the effectiveness of the delivery system, the efficiency of budget execution, and other capacity and implementation and governance issues are absolutely critical in getting things done effectively and getting to result on the ground. So let me stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Diop. I think you have raised a good number of points. One is the need for some kind of global approach to this, or at least being aligned also with global developments, and perhaps for the more developed countries to be mindful of the situation of the less developed countries, so we don't experience, for instance, a tapering of the monetary easing a little too early, so that the recovery in the less developed countries will be stalled. And then the need for a comprehensive view of financing, as well as the importance of looking not just at financing, but at resource allocation and resource utilization, which I think is very, very important in the Philippines. It's just unfortunate that one of the panelists we had invited from the DBM has not been able to join us. I think that we're missing that point. In the meantime, let me call on Mr. Selva Ramachandran to talk to us a little bit more about the integrated national financing framework that was presented a little earlier, but really give us a little bit more flavor as to, details on how it can actually help the Philippines in linking finance with development results. Mr. Selva, please.
Thank you. First, let me come back to Philippines and SDGs. As Secretary Chua mentioned during his briefing, Philippines development plans and policies are SDG friendly. So we have a good foundation. 68 out of 155 SDG indicators are already in the Philippine development plan. You have a SDG subcommittee on SDGs. You don't see this in many countries. There's already a platform for the subcommittee to look at the SDG issues very clearly. I'll come back to the integrated national financial strategy, but before that, I see Philippines can share its experience elsewhere. At the same time, Philippines also can learn from elsewhere. Quick 3 points before I get into the INFF. Number one, to me, with the impact of COVID, it's very important to look at the multidimensional approach to SDGs. Philippines has already applied in its development plan, but I think we need to deepen further the multidimensional approach, looking at the impact of COVID-19 into that. Another look will help us to understand the emerging issues and trends, and to look at it critically in the SDGs, the 3 SDG areas that Gustavo also mentioned. 2, I would like to echo Yusek Perez and my colleague from World Bank as well. The SDG localization is critically important. I think 2022 is approaching, and the gravity for development is shifting more and more towards local government. The more capacity they have, the ability they have, that's where I think we will see in future the achievement of SDGs much faster. And I think monitoring and review becomes important. That's my 3rd point. I think the upcoming preparation of VNR provides an opportunity to look at the whole monitoring and review more carefully. Now, coming back to your question, how can the integrated national financial framework can help the government to link finance with development results? Again, I can reiterate the point. No country can finance SDGs nor COVID-19 recovery by taking action in one financing alone. We need to look at the integrated financing mechanism. In that sense, the INFF helps to identify and implement policies and reforms to increase better aligning finance toward the achievement of national sustainable development priorities. 2, the INFF consider all types of finance, be it public, private, domestic, international, and provide a framework for enhancing the coherence for sustainable development. In that sense, I wanted to bring a couple of examples from elsewhere. As the INFF, the joint program also will be looking into formulation and supporting financing strategy. I see 2 examples, very interesting examples that I pick up. This is from Mexico and Uzbekistan. These 2 countries, as part of the financing framework, have moved forward to launch SDG bond. In the case of Mexico, they launched the SDG bond in 2020 for a period of 7 years with a total bond of $890 million. And we can see how the resources from private sector will come into supporting the SDG programs. I think that's something probably moving forward we could look into it. Following that, Uzbekistan looked at that model And Uzbekistan also launched their own sovereign bond in London Stock Exchange in 2021, close to $100 million, much smaller, but for a period of for 10 years. And very interesting, the bond will facilitate the transfer of resources from private funds, and they focus on number of SDGs they've selected: education, water management, health, green transportation, issues along that line. So I think this kind of examples will be useful. Coming back to the joint program, the joint program also will support the government in developing monitoring risk-informed multi-sectoral costed action plans on demographic dividend and reducing teenage pregnancy. I think the issue of teenage pregnancy is becoming a critical issue in Philippines, and we cannot see that in isolation. It is part of the demographic dividend issues. I mean, the young teenage girls have a huge contribution to make the country, and they are part of the human capital. I think that issue has to be looked into carefully. This is where, as part of the three agencies, UNFPA, one of the agencies, will be focusing. Similarly, we can already see the impact on school education. This particular joint program also will be critical to look at expanding on all issues, including supporting the development and budget tagging tool for children at the subnational level. That is what UNICEF will be doing. In the case of UNDP, as part of the agency, we will look at the larger SDG tagging, SDG financing, at the examples that I've mentioned. I think it's very important to pick up the trend from the world, from the private sector. The private sector is becoming more sensitive towards SDGs, and increasingly they are looking at environmental, social, and governance concerns. And the more we have that ability to work with the private sector, the better it will be in any countries. So in that sense, a mapping of the private sector investments also will become very important for countries like Philippines. And a number of countries have done this, right from Bangladesh to Cambodia to Uzbekistan. And based on that, they retail the private sector funding to certain areas. To me, the important thing is, it is just not enough to cost and financing, to cost and look at the financing gaps. INFF is important, but it's just not enough for us to cost and identify the financing gap. It is absolutely important to make an effective case, investment case. And if we don't invest, the cost of inaction, what will it lead to? I think that's what will be important. I just wanted to be brief, and let me stop there.
So many important points that you have raised. Very interesting experience. You mentioned about the sovereign bond issuance. So is that correct? Of Mexico?
Yes.
Dedicated to be used for the SDGs.
Yes, absolutely.
That's how it goes. When countries do that, I'm just wondering, and they have this macro framework, macro fiscal framework, they are doing this within, that framework, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Whatever these two framework, I looked into it very closely with their respective Department of Finance or Ministry of Finance. So, it is part of the bigger picture.
Yeah. So it respects the macro fiscal framework. So very, very important also for government to realize when to, at what point. Right now we're saying you need fiscal support, you need fiscal stimulus. You don't have to worry too much about fiscal deficit issues, public debt sustainability. You can go a bit more. But in the future, I wonder how that plays out. Anyway, that's maybe in the future you can teach us more about this.
Yeah. I mean, we will learn experience from that. That's what I'm saying. Philippines experience useful elsewhere. Experience from elsewhere will be useful for Philippines.
Yeah, and I think, again, I'd like to point out, you have also emphasized the need for the localization of the SDGs. And what I mean, USEC JP has also talked about localization of SDGs, meaning getting the local governments to realize their responsibility as well as their commitment to the achievement of the SDGs. But I think this is a two-way process. Yes, with Mandana's ruling, the LGUs have more money, but as that happens, maybe not this year, not in 2022, but in the following years, there is a need for national government to actually withdraw from actually performing devolved activities, meaning if it's a devolved activities, let the locals do it. And that brings us to all these questions about do they have the capacity? Will they prioritize the SDGs? And so very important here is get the socialization of the SDGs to local governments. Because I think, I'm not sure, somebody said, you know, at the end of the day, many of the SDGs, particularly those that concerns public sector financing, many of those activities have been devolved. Health, even agriculture, not so much environment, but social welfare, even social assistance to some extent. But maybe we can return to that. I would like to go back to Yusek Hill to tell us more about the new tax measures that the Department of Finance are looking at. You said there are two measures, or rather in Congress right now.
Yeah, actually there are two big batches of measures. One is the financial institutions tax and financial products tax, and then we have the valuation reforms for real property taxation by local governments. Those are the two major. Plus, there's a mining tax reform, which is already in. I think it's already in the Senate. So we are waiting for the Senate to act on these bills. Also, there's a tax on the digital economy to give BIR a stronger hand in implementing taxes on digital transactions. But aside from this, we are preparing a CTRP 2.0, which we hope we can submit to the next administration when they come in next year. And we are still in the process of formulating the measures. Most of this would include the administration, tax administration, particularly on VAT. We need to institute some VAT benchmarks, because right now input taxes exceed output taxes in many industries, which we don't believe is right, because if input taxes exceed export taxes, then there's negative value added. So there's an oversupply of input.
I mean, definitely for a domestic enterprise, you cannot have negative VAT, right?
That's true. That's not possible. So we are trying to, we have a program, a digitalization program for the two bureaus to make sure that their operations are digitalized so that it's very easy to mine data. It's very easy for them to find out where the leakages are. And also they can check across industry, so, because transaction of one, the sales of one is the purchase of another. If you are able to digitalize all the data, then you can check the accuracy of their declarations. We are sure that we can do a lot of these things. Also in the case of BOC, data coming from our trading partners indicate much higher imports than what our Bureau of Customs reports to us. So we'll have to find out through more digitalization how this is happening. There must be a lot of leakages from the system.
Yeah, I have been involved in kind of those two issues before. VAT benchmarking way back, so I realize it's easy to talk about it, but I hope this time we actually get some traction and some real results, as well as the comparison in these customs duties, where the valuation here is lower than, or rather higher, lower. So I hope we get traction there this time. I would, and thank you very much. One last question for you, Yusek. Any plans to introduce carbon taxation?
Yeah, that's in this, we call what CTRP 2.0, 2.0.
So that will be part
the second tax reform that we will do will include the carbon tax.
Yeah.
And then also gambling tax and electronic and mass messaging.
Yeah.
We're studying those. Maybe you can help us in those areas.
The other question, I know we have little time. I see Malu telling us we only have a few minutes left, but I'm just very interested when you talked about taxation of digital services.
Yes.
Do we actually have the infrastructure to do that right now?
Not yet, but we are trying to get there. We got a concessional. We have a assistance from Korea on that. We will try to transfer their technology in the Philippines so that we will be able to get more data, and how that Koreans mine their data so that they collect more from taxpayers.
Plus, they have good internet.
Yeah, very good internet. That's crucial.
Yeah, that's very, very crucial. But to go back to JP, we talk about the demographic dividend, its potential. We talked about how how it's very much concentrated in 3 regions, which is, which accounts for 60+% of the economy, which is good because that means that will really have some impact on the national level economic growth and productivity, right? But at the same time, when you have this large disparity across regions, it's kind of I feel kind of uncomfortable in the sense that necessarily that will increase inequality, perhaps even result in some social, problems with social cohesion. And my question is, how do we get the laggards to advance faster? What are the strategies? What strategies can we adapt?
Well, under the local budget circulars that DBM has put up, they've said that national agencies can continue to assist the 5th and 6th class municipalities. I don't think there are 5th and 6th class provinces or cities, as well as what we call the GIDA barangays. So, and of course, some of the GIDA barangays are also in cities, are within the 3 major regions. So there is that window of continuing to support those laggards, coming from an equity fund, that I don't know yet how it will become available, but we must think about LGUs delivering basic services. So there are higher level functions in health, in agriculture, in social welfare, and in population and development where I work, where the national agencies can play an equalizing role. No? And this is something that we must have in place, a good monitoring system where LGUs are falling behind. We need to be able to quickly step in. So the INFF can be a system, the monitoring part of it, by which we can become equity providers for those that are falling behind.
Right.
Okay, thank you very much, JP. I think you've raised a final question there on the need for equalization transfers, perhaps, for LGUs that somehow, because of issues with the IRA distribution formula, do not have enough resources to provide the functions that they are supposed, or to perform the functions that they are supposed to do. I'm very sorry. I would have wanted to ask more questions from Mr. Diop. I'm sorry, I have problems with the name. But and I don't have time to actually do the synthesis, but I hope the synthesis, some of my comments would have helped in that direction. Thank you very much to all the panelists, Yusek Beltran, Yusek JP, Mr. Job, Dr. Selva. Thank you very much for this wonderful discussion. Maybe we should do this again. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I turn the floor over to Malu.
Thank you.
Thank you very much to our panelists. First off, a few housekeeping matters. I would like to say sorry to the PCCI Secretary General, Mr. Ruben Pascual. He represented the Philippine Chamber of Commerce and Industry. There are a few questions posted. I just like to read them through so that they could be recognized. From Rene Raya, Secretary Karl mentioned that the Philippines is already at the threshold of reaching an upper middle income country status. But a cursory look at our revenue generation, tax to GDP, and social spending patterns, specifically in health, education, and social protection, resemble more like that of a low-income country. This observation reflects reality? That is his question. And can a good balance be achieved? Jessica Cantos of Social Watch said Congress should concentrate on assisting LGUs to generate their own revenues. Package 3 of the CTRP should be supported and strongly pushed to raise real property tax collections. We're winding down now, and I think it's important to just give a few takeaways. The importance and relevance of the JPINFF cannot be overemphasized. Our National Development Plan and Ambition 2040 already lay out what needs to be financed. JPINFF spell out how the national strategy will be financed and implemented, relying on the full range of public and private financing sources. INFFs are a planning and delivery tool to help countries strengthen planning processes and to overcome obstacles to financing, sustainable development, and the SDGs at the national levels. A few additional takeaways from our panelists. Okay, Secretary Karl talked about before COVID and after Delta. I think it would be good that the ending of all this effort should be our redemption, our return back to better days. But I think our panelists also suggested that maybe this is the time to have a catch-up plan, more creative, more comprehensive financing, more effective implementation. That was from Mr. Diop of the World Bank. I think it's important also to look at the equity across regions of the country and how, as Dr. Chat said, maybe the rest of the regions that are falling behind could catch up sooner and faster. I think it's important to also stress the value of the role of the private sector. Everybody looked at that. Government is in need of more assistance from the private sector. There's some ray of hope that the Mandanas ruling could boost efforts of local government units to actually address health, education, and other urgent social concerns. But Dr. Chat said there must be a seamless transition from national to local government units. Dr. JP was saying that perhaps it's important for LGUs to really embrace the SDGs as their own plan and not just national plans as the MDGs had presented themselves early on. I guess this is the time for us to really look at the need everywhere in all this planning for the INFF to have all hands on deck, all money on the table, and all our expertise combined together. Thank you all for coming and have a nice day. May we remind the participants of the Inception Workshop to kindly remain and we shall open the first session in a few minutes. Ako po si Malu Mangahas, magandang araw at maraming salamat sa inyong lahat.
Maraming salamat.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
That has been a very thought-provoking session. Excellent inputs from everyone.
Thank you.
Maraming salamat, Ms. Malu.
Thank you.
Maraming salamat, panelists.
Thank you. Maraming salamat.
We had a peak of 160 participants and panelists, and they all stayed, most of them actually throughout. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Shatmanasan. Thank you, everyone. Perhaps we can end the live streaming on Facebook as we transition to the Inception Workshop. We can pause the recording as well. Thank you.
So I hope everyone has had time to take their CR break and to get their coffee. So in the earlier part of this afternoon, we were all given an overview of the joint program and listened to a very interesting discussion on the related matters concerning financing for the SDGs. For the rest of this afternoon, we will be the objectives of our session will be to review the details of this joint program and validate whether the targets and outcomes that have been outlined in its work plan are still achievable. And given the many events that have happened since the program was first conceptualized almost 2 years ago, we will also be discussing the governance mechanism or the protocols for the oversight and decision-making of the joint program with the different organizations and agencies who are part of the steering committee. And then finally, we will be reviewing in detail the work plan and making modifications to it as based on inputs that we will be discussing during this Inception Workshop, which will take place this afternoon and also on Monday afternoon. For this afternoon, our agenda will be to have a we may do away with the quick introductions. So we will be presenting in greater detail the JP-INFF theory of change and the results framework. And then we will be also discussing the governance structure and institutional arrangements. And on Monday, beginning at 2 p.m., we will be discussing the detailed work plan, and we will be breaking out into two groups, one group for outcome 1 and 3, and another group for outcome 2. And it is during these breakout sessions where we will review the activities and the outputs that will be produced out of this joint program. Before we proceed, we would like to give you a few reminders once again, so that we can have a fruitful and productive workshop this afternoon. First, we would like to request for your full attention for the next hour and a half. And may we request that you also set aside your other devices and to put them on silent mode. We have now started a bit late with our schedule, but we will end by 5 p.m. this afternoon. And to ensure that we are able to finish within the schedule, if there are any unresolved topics, we will be parking them for discussion during later meetings of the technical working group or the steering committee. We have had just our break, so we will no longer be having any breaks for the duration of this workshop this afternoon. By the way, I forgot to introduce myself. I am Patrick Lim, and I will be one of the co-facilitators for the Inception workshop today and on Monday afternoon. And together with me is Pem Grafilo, and I will pass on to her for a quick introduction of the participants. Pem.
Hello, magandang hapon po. Actually, we're going to use the Miro board to introduce ourselves. So I am pasting in the chat box the link to the Miro board. So if you could click the link so that you will have access to the Miro board that you see in front of you. So please click one of the post-its here. Choose the right box where you are from, and please start putting in your name and your organization. So we'll just have an idea of who is here in our meeting this afternoon. So double click the post-its and you can now type your name. So you will see a bar and you can type your name. So this is also a good exercise because we will be using this virtual board to put in our comments as we go through the Inception workshop. Please double click the post-it, and when you see a bar, that means you're ready to type your name. So we have basically 4 sectors here: government, CSOs, private sector, and UN agencies. Please don't forget just your nickname and put your organizations, please, so we know from which organizations you're all coming from. So we have Alriza Zubiri. Could you include your organization, please? Wow, we have a lot of participants coming from the UN agencies. So UNDP, UNRCO, UNFPA, UNHCR, and UNICEF. Okay, for government, we have participants coming from NEDA, from the Provincial Agriculture's Office of Occidental Mindoro. We have people coming from SEC, DSWD. Welcome. How about the private sector?
Can you view it na, Pem? This is Cynthia. Hindi ko siya
Yeah, I don't see your... Hi, Cynthia.
Hello. Wait lang ah.
Can you view?
No, I typed my name already.
Yeah, it's not showing.
But
Can you
how
do
do
it again? Just double click again and then type in your name and your organization. Thanks, Cynthia.
Is it appearing now? Hindi pa rin.
It's so big, it's up.
Mm.
It's okay. Don't be shy.
Yeah.
This is actually an exercise on how we can use the Miro board later. So, Cynthia from the Philippine Global Compact Network is here. Thank you, joining us from the private sector. Anyone from the CSOs? I noticed we have a lot of participants from the CSO community. So again, Jack,
Social Watch Philippines is here. Yeah.
Yeah. So double click and type. Okay. I think we can continue trying to populate and introduce ourselves. So Cynthia, congratulations, you made it.
No, that's not me. Somebody else typed my name.
Somebody else did. All right.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, from government, we have CWC here also, and we have Renz from NORSU. Okay. Please feel free to continue populating our sort of virtual board attendance sheet. I think it's time to turn over the floor to Patrick now so we can proceed with the next agenda, but please feel free to continue and please don't leave the board because this we will be using the Miro board during the entire duration of this afternoon's workshop. Thank you. So I'll stop sharing now and turn over the virtual floor to Patrick once again.
Yeah. Thank you, Pem. So we'll now start with our presentations for this afternoon. So I will be, for the first part, we will be presenting the theory of change and results framework for the JPINFF. So that's what will be, yung acronym for the joint program, JPINFF. And it will be presented by Ms. Louie Lim Holongbayan, team leader for institutions and partnerships with the UNDP. So may I request everyone who are still viewing the Miro board to kindly return to the Zoom screen so you will be able to see Louie's presentation. So passing it on to you, Louie.
Thank you, Patrick. I hope that it's fine with you if I repeat some of my basically messages or statements earlier during the launch, as this forms part of my presentation as well. Again, we have developed the joint program. Sasabihin ko ba ulit ang, should I say the full title again? The joint SDG Fund Joint Program on Reaping the Demographic Dividend and Managing the Socio-Economic Impact of COVID-19 by applying an integrated national financing framework in the Philippines. So and because we have already presented an introductory brief on the joint SDG fund as well as the joint program, I'll go straight again to the results framework. Can we move to the next slide? So this is reiterating what was presented earlier. And just to give a context, the Financing for Development Agenda, or the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, introduced the concept of integrated national financing frameworks to help better align financing policies of countries, of governments, with long-term development strategies and plans. So this basically is what we are advocating as part of the joint program in order to reach the joint SDG fund outcomes, the highest level outcomes of the joint program, which are additional financing leverage to accelerate SDG achievement, as well as the implementation of an integrated national financing strategy to address opportunities and tap into innovative finance and the private sector. The higher level outcome of additional financing, of leveraging additional financing, will not be simply attained by implementing an integrated national financing framework, particularly in the context of the Philippines. We have read and we have heard earlier that there is still, some work that needs to be done in terms of strengthening the integration or the alignment of planning, financing, and budgeting systems, both at the national level and the local level, to deliver on additional resources, not just for the SDGs, but for the achievement of medium-term and long-term development outcomes as stated in the Philippine Development Plan and in the Ambition 2040, or the long-term vision of the government for the Philippines, as well as ensure that we are on the right trajectory for COVID-19 recovery. UNDP, UNFPA, and UNICEF have come together to develop this joint program, which presents, in coordination with various government agencies, so that we can put together the expertise and the resources, the tools, in order to apply the building blocks of the integrated national financing framework. So the joint program provides catalytic support. These are tools, technical assistance, support to coordination, support to consensus building, providing a platform for continuing dialogue as part of a whole of government and multi-stakeholder approach to strengthen not just the current mechanisms of national planning, financing, and budgeting, to ensure that resource allocation is more effectively targeted, but also, again, to put in place a more diversified and coherent financing framework that can help leverage new additional resources from both the public sector as well as private sector. And this is both domestic or national as well as international. And when we talk about international, that's where that's where development partners come in. In order for us to meet these outcomes, the joint program has identified 3 sub-outcomes. This is developing and adopting an integrated national financing framework. So we will work closely with NEDA, DBM, DOF, and other agencies so that we're able to achieve this sub-outcome, and I will present you some of the work behind this. That we apply the INFF developed in sub-outcome 1 for complex priority issues. And these are the issues on reducing teenage pregnancy. These are the issues on reaping demographic dividend. And these are the issues on child protection within a risk mitigation framework for COVID-19. This will be done both at the national and local levels as well. And lastly, through analytical work, we will work with government as well as private sector and other organizations to identify strategies for alternative funding sources for the SDGs. And in the panel earlier, as well as the discussion between Gustavo Gonzalez, the UN resident coordinator, as well as Secretary Karl Chua, we have heard a number of possibilities on how we can, where we can source additional or alternative funding, financing. Next slide, please. So in order for us to achieve the sub-outcome on integrated financing framework to support SDGs, what we need to deliver on are the two things. So if we are able to strengthen the capacities of relevant government agencies to apply the INFF building blocks, and if we are able to provide the necessary support so that government can adopt an SDG budget tagging system in cross-sectoral issues, then we will therefore be able to develop and adopt the INFF to support the SDGs. This comes with a number of risks and assumptions, and I will give you some of those, present to you some of those later as well. In the context of this presentation, I request you, all the participants, to see where you will be able to contribute to these outputs. Again, these outputs are on the left-hand side, and the sub-outcome is on the right-hand side. Next, please. Sub-outcome 2. I will pass this on to Drew. Drew, are you in? Looks like he's away. In the context of achieving the sub-outcome on applying the INFF for complex priority issues within a risk mitigation framework for COVID-19, there are two key outputs, and this is capacity of government to develop and monitor risk-informed multisectoral costed action plans on the demographic dividend and the EO141. This is the national priority on reducing teenage pregnancy at the national and local level is strengthened. And the socio-economic impact of COVID-19, particularly on the country's trajectory towards achieving the SDGs and the demographic dividend is analyzed. And we will be able to move into the piloting of the INFF for these issues. Next slide. On sub-outcome 3, in order for us to identify alternative SDG financing sources, hopefully we will have enough time under the joint program timeline to also endorse and for government to adopt these. We will need to start with an updating of the development finance assessment. Why update? Because we did this in 2014, which is taking a holistic look at the financing landscape of the Philippines, meaning we took a look at possible financing sources from the public and private sector, domestic and international. And for this, we intend to focus again on COVID-19 recovery and reaping the demographic dividend. With that assessment, that will inform, options to develop a national strategy for mobilizing public and private resources for the SDGs. This is because we already would have found out or have seen the full development financing landscape. With a draft national strategy, this is where we can start also sitting down with groups of possibly investors or with the international community, with development partners, with possible donors, and also with government to develop or to design and experiment on new financing instruments that the joint program can endorse to the government. This we will be doing in very close coordination with, of course, NEDA, who is our key government partner, but also with the SDG subcommittee within the Development Budget Coordination Committee. The Secretary Karl Chua mentioned this earlier as well, that there is really that opportunity for us to be working closely with them. Next slide, please. There are, as I mentioned earlier, there are a number of challenges and risks that we are facing. Patrick mentioned earlier that it's almost 2 years in the making. The joint program is already 2 years in the making. Not yet, I think it's just a year and a half. But it has been overtaken by, it has met a lot of issues during the design period. And that's why we are presenting to you what we see should be the new or the updated results of the joint program already. And we would like for you to also inform us of any other challenges and risks that we may have overseen. Among these are, the shortened implementation time frame. We intended to commence the implementation last year, but we met into some challenges in terms of the endorsement. That's all good now. You've seen, our signatories and our partners all with us. But because of that, we had to update the joint program work plan. And this is what we will be presenting to you on Monday. We are facing still, the challenges of the pandemic, of quarantines, of community lockdowns, etc. And this will entail that we continue with online coordination. And we have been facing this challenge ever since. Lastly, we think the most critical one really is the upcoming national and local elections, which will not only constrain coordination of activities and engagements, both at the national and local levels, but also open up some risks in terms of the reversal of some commitments for the joint program. And which is why we really want to work at the technical level so that we bring you in as not just partners of the joint program, but also as champions of the joint program. Some of the leadership personalities may need to leave But we do intend to continue working with you, our partners at the technical level, so that we are able to not just build the foundation, but lay that down for possible reforms later on as we move towards achieving our, not just our output, but the outcomes of the joint program. I think that's the last slide, right? Back to you, Patrick.
Patrick, you're on mute.
Sorry. Thank you, Louis. So we'll now be opening the floor for discussion. So there will be 3 modes on how you can give your questions or comments. You can first raise your hand, and then you can speak, or you may type your question into the chat box, which you are now able to use. And then the last option will be to put your comments on the Miro board. So you may also opt to provide your comments on the Miro board. Kindly raise your hands if you have any question. I think there is one already comment from Jessica of Social Watch in the chat box. She's asking if the membership of Social Watch in the steering committee will it prohibit them from bidding in possible contracts to be awarded under this joint program? I don't know if Louis?
Jack, we will need to discuss that among the UN organizations who are participating in this joint program. Definitely, we wanted you in the technical working group. But again, if there are plans for you to participate as third-party contractors, and we will need to think about that. I do not want to provide a sweeping answer of yes or no right now, because we do acknowledge the experience and the work of Social Watch Philippines in terms of not just budget tagging, but also in the whole financing of development outcomes. So I will get back to you on that, Jack. Thank you.
But just a follow-up, Louis, thank you for your response. It might, since that's inception meetings that we're doing now, and for Monday, we'll already identify the parameters, the nuts and bolts on the possible projects that this initiative will bear fruit. It might be, the conflict of interest there might play in. I mean, we as part of the steering committee, we will be putting in our inputs, and I'm not comfortable in attending when later on may insider information ako on the potential projects. So I mean, early on, we want to know if you're okay with us. Of course, we're most happy to put in our 2 cents worth, but if, for today and for Monday, but will our participation and presence in the 2 meetings today and for Monday, will that already stop us, prohibit us from the future, from participating in future projects for as a result of the JP? So if often quickly you can say yes or no, then I would be. I mean, it's okay for me to be excused from participating in the inception meeting. I'm the only CSO here, eh. So I think. So I don't know if Cynthia is that in global ano mo, is that CSO? But yun, if we are most happy to be here and for Monday. But we would appreciate advice ASAP. Parang, even now, kasi baka may discomfort na kagad rin. I mean, we would have parang initial insight track na. Yeah, this is si Attorney Annie.
Oh,
Hello. Yes. Patrick, this is Annie. And I think Louis asked if I can respond to it directly.
Okay.
Yeah? Okay lang. Jack, I think Social Watch Philippines is actually invited because you are already a technical partner in one of the ongoing activities. And one of the ongoing activities of the joint program is actually the local budget tagging for children. Now, the inception workshop is really intended to review the overall the frameworks, the activities and the results. Now, in engaging with partners of or contractors, the different UN agencies will also have their own procurement processes and partnership processes. And I don't see any reason why your participation in the meeting right now and on Monday would affect if ever in the future you are also interested to bid for a particular activity or even to partner with the agencies. But that's me. I'm again speaking in behalf of UNICEF. And I suspect that's also the same with UNFPA and UNDP. But let me ask my colleagues if they also want to come in.
I would suggest, Jack, that we take this up. If you are uncomfortable right now, it's fine if you want leave. But just to let you know that all these things that we are discussing here will be, public documents as well. This forms part of the joint program document, which is in a public website. So there's nothing that there's no trade secret here yet.
So in case, you are not getting any undue advantage over any other potential partners.
All right, if that's the assurance, everything will be public in the end. Then that actually erases whatever discomfort. But I hope you also understand where I was coming from initially. I mean, we're designing, and you can be a referee and a player at the same time. So.
Okay, thank you, Jack, and thank you. Back to you, Patrick.
Thank you for that. So, are there other questions or comments on the theory of change and the results framework? I think what would really be valuable especially from our partners from government, would be the risks and challenges slide. If you could provide your inputs on this. Again, so we can raise your hand or put your comments into chat. I hear from Aljo. Aljo, would you like to verbalize or I'll just read it out? Okay, I'll just read out Aljo's comment. Aljo from DSWD. Given the shorter timeline of the project, what would be the strategy in updating the work plan? One recommendation is for us to also establish the parameters for prioritization of programs, projects to be implemented, which would be useful especially from an NGA perspective, and potentially identifying the non-negotiable items for the joint program to achieve results. Anyone from the team who wants to take on this question?
Thanks, Patrick, and thanks, Aljo. This Inception workshop is already the major strategy in updating the work plan. As mentioned earlier, we have fully signed the joint program in May this year, but we have commenced, we started the design of that since last year, around March. So before we came here to sit down with all of you, we, within the participating UN organizations, as well as the UN Resident Coordinator's Office, have sat down with a number of our partners already to again present to them the revisions in the joint, not just the joint work plan, but also in terms of the results. So what we have presented to you now is already a product of those consultations after the joint program document was signed, because we already knew that some of the original commitments will no longer be achievable and are no longer realistic. We thank the agencies that we have been closely working with, who gave us that reality check. So this is a larger group, and we hope to hear from you, especially those who have not seen the joint program before, to give us one more level of reality check. But definitely from our partners in NEDA, for example, we have received that reality check already, as well as other government partners. Thank you.
Thank you, Louis. Are there
Sorry,
other?
just to add, Patrick, I missed what Aljo mentioned about non-negotiable items, because we are responding to the joint SDG fund component on SDG financing architecture, the development of and adoption of an integrated national financing framework is a non-negotiable, because we have givens with respect to the joint SDG fund, not givens with respect to the joint program, but the joint SDG fund, which has provided the resources for this joint program. And these are the two outcomes that I have presented earlier. Number one is the highest level outcome, which is additional financing leverage. That is, the highest level outcome, and what we need to make sure is that we lay down the foundations so that progressively government will be able to attain that. The second one, which we see as a lower level outcome, is the development of the INFF. So that for us is still achievable within the joint program period. But making sure that we have, we have with us government, especially in terms of the development. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Louis. Are there any other questions or comments? Sorry, was that our hand raised, Mar? And Roy, sorry, Roy.
Yes, thank you, Patrick. This is just a rejoinder to what Louis mentioned, and in a way, a response to Aljo's concern. Even internally, I know we reflected on what success would look like concretely for this joint program, no? And to finance SDGs is there are multiple pathways, but one of the major pathways really is government investments, and this is through the national expenditure program or our national budget process, no? Originally, we were very optimistic that we will be able to apply the INFF, the framework, the monitoring, sana for the 2022 budget. No? Had we been able to really launch this earlier, we could have set up the systems this year and then try it out in the 2022 budget document, sana, no, that is being submitted by government to Congress. Pero this time, I think ang recalibration that we will see is that we would parang also to synchronize with government's own budget preparation cycle. Ang reality check sa atin is we will see probably this framework being pilot tested in the budget preparation for 2023, no? So baka yun yung recalibration that we would need to also I think we have done it in what Louis presented, and I hope we will get our partners buy-in and support because most of our partners here naman are from government, and we do the budget preparation I think early in the year, ano, mga January pa lang ata or February. That's already happening. And so if we can set up some of these mechanisms or these frameworks, sana makahabol tayo in applying this framework for the 2023 National Expenditure Program or budget preparation process. But mindful that yun nga, na it's just one of the many pathways to financing SDGs, no? But really a major and very pivotal and consequential pathway in itself. So siguro yun yung support that we would also like to solicit from our partners here. Over.
Okay, thank you, Roy. There was a question sa chat about the materials on the work plan. I think some of you have already received the materials. They have been sent. For those who have not, the Secretariat will be sending to you. Kindly just message in the chat if you have not received the materials so we can make sure that these are sent to you. Thank you. Are there other questions? If there are no more hands, I think we can proceed. Yes, Ms. Jack.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. One quick question lang. From to our friends from NEDA, and if there are some people here from PSA, kasi we have to evaluate where we are now. Eka nga ni Secretary Karl ay Delta before before COVID, BC, and after Delta. But after Delta, we have to look at the baseline again. I'd like to find out kasi we really need updated data and statistics here, and the Congress is kind enough to enact into law the CBMS community-based monitoring system. I don't know if but the support for that is targeted lang ng PSA to 5th and 6th class municipalities. I doubt if other LGUs would really spend money for the CBMS, but I think it's important for us to egg on and give some support to LGUs on data generation so that we will know where we are and how this pandemic has really affected our people. Quick lang kasi just so we have some baseline to start with after Delta.
Okay, maybe if I could invite, I don't think we have anyone from PSA here, but maybe from the SDG Subcommittee Secretariat, if anyone could give a quick update.
Hello, this is Elaine from the subcommittee. From our previous meetings with PSA, so this year they'll be releasing the FI. So and the poverty statistics, they aim to release the poverty statistics by the end of the year. And then they're also revising the indicators for the tier 1, 2, and 3 classification. Insofar as for the other data, we don't have yet information if they will be also released this year. So far, we have the poverty statistics and updates on the tier classifications.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Elaine. Okay, are there any final questions? Sige, if none, we'll now proceed. I'll give it back to Louis to present the governance mechanism for the joint program.
All right, I presented this earlier as well, but I didn't have enough time to go through the roles and responsibilities of the steering committee as well as the technical working group. So please excuse if I will repeat the presentation of this slide, which you have seen earlier. Well, some of you, if you were with us during the launch. So to the joint program governance mechanism is a way for us to manage and coordinate the not just the implementation, but more of the direction of the joint program. And so we have a high-level steering committee, which will provide oversight and strategic guidance on program coordination, management, and implementation. And this is co-chaired by the Secretary of NEDA, as well as the UN Resident Coordinator. This, the co-chairmanship of the UN Resident Coordinator is for joint programs because he or she, the resident coordinator represents the UN agencies involved in the joint program. And so UNDP, UNFPA, and UNICEF will also be in the steering committee, represented by our heads of agencies. As critical partners in the oversight and strategic guidance of the joint program, we are also requesting the DBM, DOF, POPCOM, Department of Health, DSWD, DepEd, and the Council for the Welfare of Children to be members of the steering committee as well. You would note here that this is first the memberships is for UN organizations and the resident coordinator's office, as well as government. We would like to take the opportunity for the steering committee to meet and then identify other partners outside the UN and government during the organizational meeting. I will show you later the roles and responsibilities in detail of the steering committee. We also have a technical working group, and a number of you here will join us. We hope that you will continue to join us as part of the joint program technical working group. As the assigned focals of the joint program from NEDA, we have invited the directors of the public investment staff of NEDA, as well as the SDG subcommittee secretariat. I see here Director Mirna Asuncion as co-chairs of the technical working group, as along with us, the UN agencies or the participating UN organizations in this joint program, UNDP, UNFPA, and UNICEF. And we will be alternating as co-chairs in the technical working group. The technical representatives of the members of the steering committee will be invited in the technical working group as well. But we do want to make sure that the Department of the Interior and Local Government, the Central Bank, the Securities and Exchange Commission will join us as well, particularly for the third sub-outcome discussions. The local government, I can't remember, is this the provincial government, Annie, of Samar. We will also be inviting, because the work of UNICEF involves Samar. As Annie, please go ahead.
Sorry, yeah, just to confirm that, yeah, it's the province of Northern Samar.
There.
Yeah.
Province of Northern Samar. I keep on forgetting that, sorry. Thank you. We are also inviting the Senate Economic Planning Office, as well as the House of Representatives Congressional Planning, Budget, Research Department. Considering that, you know, the systems, the tools that we are introducing here, we do want the legislative to be able to make use of as well. We fully appreciate the legislative's oversight function in terms of budget allocation. So we do want them to be to appreciate, you know, what the INFF brings. We have started inviting civil society organizations, and that's, you know, that's why we have Social Watch Philippines here, as well as private sector representatives, particularly those that represent, you know, networks of businesses as well as organizations. And that's why we have the Global Compact Network here in the Philippine Chamber of Commerce and Industry. We really would like for them to bring in, you know, their insights and their experiences, both in the country and outside, in terms of, you know, those alternative financing, innovative financing strategies. But we do also recognize that, you know, private sector and civil society's contribution to the SDGs is not equally recognized, as, you know, when it's compared to government's contribution. And we do want to make sure that this joint program provides that platform to make sure that, you know, these contributions are recognized as well within the joint program. The joint program core group is composed of, you know, the UN agencies that are here right now, UNDP as lead for this joint program, UNFPA, UNICEF, and the resident coordinators office. We need to make sure that we are, that we are accountable to the joint program resources, as well as, you know, the delivery of outputs to the joint SDG Fund Secretariat. The resources for the joint program is part of a larger UN multi-donor trust fund, and we are responsible and accountable to report on that to the fund secretariat. We will be working closely with the Joint Program Management and Coordination Unit. In the next couple of months, they will be the ones, you know, closely coordinating with you, bugging you, and seeking your inputs in various outputs and deliverables of the joint program. We will make sure to introduce to you the full team as soon as it is organized as one unit. This team is responsible for the day-to-day implementation and management of the joint program. Next slide, please. Quickly, to show you the roles and responsibilities of the steering committee and the technical working group. As I mentioned earlier, the steering committee provides oversight and strategic guidance. It also provides a strategic overview of the joint work plan and budgets, ensuring that evolving programmatic priorities and funding gaps are addressed to attain the desired outcomes. The joint program steering committee will also facilitate synergy and complementation with similar programs and projects by other government and development partners. So we really would like, to have a diverse membership in the steering committee as well as the technical working group, so that we are able to put together, those areas of complementation for greater impact. As high-level representatives and champions of the the joint program, we see the steering committee championing the joint program and facilitating outreach to a broad constituency of stakeholders. So I just would like to call on those who represent the agencies that we have identified in the steering committee, that this will be, the roles and responsibilities of your senior officials who will represent your agencies in the steering committee. On the technical working group, again, I mentioned earlier that we are expecting that you will be able to provide technical guidance and inputs to the planning, implementation, monitoring, reporting, and later on evaluation of the joint program. There are outputs, deliverables, and activities of the joint program to the extent that it is relevant to your respective agencies. You will definitely be part of those. Another responsibility would be to analyze program bottlenecks, track progress, identify actions to be taken, and recommend strategies and innovative approaches in addressing risks and operational issues. This will involve your regular, I won't say frequent, but your regular participation in joint program activities. So we do hope that your agencies will be able to identify, a permanent representative to the technical working group, as well as one or two alternates. But to ensure that the flow of information is organized, we do want a focal from your agencies. Lastly, it's coordinate the implementation processes and activities for output and across outputs, across sub-outcomes, whether they're on the development of the INFF, or whether they're in the second outcome on applying the INFF for demographic dividend and EO 141, or for identifying strategies for alternative funding sources for the SDGs. So we do want to have cross-fertilization, checking, and ensuring that we are weaving together these different outputs together. So, and we want you to help us keep an eye on that. I think that's part of the, okay, this is the last slide, the Joint Program Coordination and Management Unit. I mentioned this earlier, but just to reiterate that the Joint Program Coordination and Management Unit will carry out and monitor program carry out on a day-to-day basis, program activities, provide secretariat support to the technical working group as well as the steering committee, and prepare the necessary compliance documents to the fund secretariat, but also make sure that we provide those reports, those progress reports to you, members of the technical working group, and also to all those who are interested in the outputs and outcomes of the joint program. So we are able to build a larger constituent for the joint program. Thank you. If there are any questions, I will try to answer them. If none, I will hand it back to Patrick. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you, Louis. Are there questions, clarifications, or recommendations on what was just presented and the governance mechanism for this joint program? Sige. So I think the presentation was pretty clear and sige, but I will allow for some more time. Are there any questions on this? Sige. So if none, I think so this is the last presentation for this afternoon. And so we will be having the second session of the Inception workshop on Monday, that's September 20 at 2 p.m. in the afternoon. I hope that everyone has received their invitation. Sorry, yes, Ms. Jack?
No, I just turned on my
Okay. Sige.
my battery.
If you have not received the link for the Monday's workshop, I think it's a separate link. Kindly send us a message either in the chat box or in the Q&A. And then reminders for Monday. Pem, do we have reminders for Monday? Wala naman.
Patrick, pahabol na question.
Yes, sige, yes, Ms. Jack.
Is he a part of the steering committee?
Sorry?
Department of Agriculture. I'm sorry, hindi ko masyadong nasilip yung composition.
Parang
Is a part?
I don't think they're part of the steering committee. Kasi I think at least for this program, the priority is on the yung demographic dividends as well as yung I think sa health sector. I don't know if anyone, Miss Louie or anyone from the team could respond.
Hi, Jack. Yes, yes, the DA is not not part of the joint program because we are focusing on reaping the demographic dividend, which basically involves POPCOM, as well as other social development agencies, DOH, DSWD, DepEd, and the Council for the Welfare of Children. Yeah, but hopefully, as again mentioned earlier, the integrated national financing framework is sector agnostic. And therefore, the work that we will be doing in terms of budget tagging, both at the national and local government levels, the process by which we will be able to provide analytical work on, the financing landscape, the analytical work on the impact of COVID-19 on the SDGs, and others can also be used, as potential inputs for other sectors. And we will make sure that, we are able to showcase these outputs to the larger, to more government agencies beyond who are in the joint program list of partners.
Yeah, thank you, Louie. Sige. I think there are no more questions. Kay had just posted in the chat box the registration link for Monday in case you have not received an invite for for Monday session. So kindly check the chat box for the link. And with this, we will end. But before we end, let's take a group picture. If we could request everyone to switch on their videos so we can have a group photo before we end today's workshop. Sige. Kindly, sige, let's wait for everyone to switch on their... sige.
Open mo ka mo. Saan?
Okay, we'll start taking a picture. I think we have 2 screens, so we'll take 2 pictures. So we'll start the first shot. 1, 2. Sorry. Again, sorry. 1, 2, 3. Sorry, hindi siya
Don't worry, Patrick. I also took photos.
Ayo, took. Okay, si Pem na nag-take. Sige. Okay, the next screen. Everyone smile. So, 1, 2, 3. Okay. Sige. So, okay na, Pem, with the pictures.
I was able to get the photos. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much, everyone. And we'll see everyone again on Monday, 2 p.m. Again, if you were not yet able to register, the link is in the chat box. So see you all again on Monday. Happy weekend to everyone. Thank you very much for participating today.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Salamat. Stay safe, everyone.
Salamat. Ingat.
Okay, Louis, Patrick, do you have to stay? Or do we go?
If you would like to give feedback, if it's good if you stay. If none, then you're free to leave. I will just check in with the team before we break for the weekend. I know we all want to break for the weekend.
We have to wait for the others to leave. So, do you think we should create another room or?
Hindi, pwede naman nating i-remove na yung iba. Jazz, Cheryl, can you help if we can remove some of the participants already? Let's leave it to the core. Let's
Yes,
just retain the core group. All right, we're good.
Okay.
Feeling ko sunog na sunog na yung attention span ng mga tao. Tapos,
Oo, Friday din
kaya
kasi.
Kahit ako Ako lang.
Si Miss Louie hindi yata natulog kagabi.
My bad. That was my fault.
I think yung biggest challenge na today is actually transitioning from the launch
Yeah.
of the I think that kind of broke the the flow.
Hopefully next Monday hindi na.
We won't meet that challenge anymore on Monday. But I was wondering, if we can make sure that we know their organizations.
Yeah.
Hindi ba natin
Sa
pwede
registration pa
i-edit
pwede?
yung registration? Wala kasi yung
Walang
agency
field.
sa registration
So there's no field po para ma-fill in nila yung registration.
Kaya pa kaya, Jazz?
I'll ask PJ if
Nandito pa si
mahaba.
PH room.
Wala, umalis na si PJ.
Wala na si PJ.
Ni-retain lang si PH room for recording.
But the Zoom account on Monday.
Stop ko na yung recording,
Yeah.
Sure. Space.
But the Zoom room in Monday will be a meeting room na, no? Hindi na siya